The first time they spoke to us, they didn't ask. They demanded. It came through every channel, TVs, phones, satellites. One voice, deep and cold, like metal scraping across ice. The whole world stopped breathing for a second. People dropped what they were doing. Even babies cried less, like they felt the shift in the air. "We are the Varnock Dominion. You belong to us now." That was it. No greetings, no introductions. Just domination, straight out the gate. Most people thought it was a prank. Some thought it was marketing for a movie. But by the time the sky turned purple over New York, no one was laughing. Their ships came fast, like falling stars in reverse. Not dozens, thousands. Black as space, sharp-edged like broken glass. They hung above our cities, silent, waiting. Not firing, just watching. That was worse than an attack. Because they wanted us to feel it, the fear. Governments scrambled. Military jets got shredded like toys when they tried to approach. Some countries launched nukes. They never reached orbit. The Varnock had shields that just swallowed them whole. A dozen world leaders tried to make contact. The Varnock never answered. Then they did the unthinkable. They shut off the sun. That's not poetic. They actually blacked out the sun. Some kind of energy curtain wrapped around Earth. Not total darkness, but a dim, gray light, like an eternal dusk. Crops started dying in days. Temperature dropped. Oceans started to freeze at the edges. And then came the orders. Submit. Surrender your weapons. End your governments. You will kneel. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a countdown. Earth had 7 days to comply, or they would begin the cleansing. They didn't explain what cleansing meant, but we all got the picture. For 6 days, the world panicked. Looting, riots, mass suicides. Some people tried to worship the Varnock, thinking maybe they'd be spared. Others hid underground, hoping to wait it out. But on the 7th day, something changed. A message broke into their transmission. It didn't come from NASA, or China, or Russia. It came from a base most people didn't even know existed, deep under the Pacific, built decades ago for a war that never happened. The man who spoke was old, gruff, and missing one eye. His name was Commander Elias Kor, and he didn't ask either. "To the Varnock Dominion," he said, standing in a dark room lit only by the glow of old machinery. "You think Earth is yours. You think we're broken. You think wrong." He tapped something on his chest. "Midnight Armada, activate." For a moment, the world was silent again. Then the oceans boiled. From under the sea, hidden beneath trenches and ice shelves, they rose. Ships the size of mountains, matte black, pulsing with red lights. Not elegant like the Varnock, but brutal, raw, made of human anger and desperation. We had no idea they even existed. These weren't toys. These weren't experiments. This was Earth's secret last card, built in silence, hidden for decades, waiting for a day when we'd have nothing left. Kor's voice came again. "You wanted Earth to kneel. We stand. You threatened us with darkness. We burn. You came for a quiet conquest. We came to raise hell." And then the sky caught fire. The Midnight Armada didn't wait. They launched, straight up, into the Varnock fleet. The first wave wasn't meant to win. It was meant to hurt. And it did. The first Varnock ship exploded so violently, pieces rained down over Europe like meteor showers. For the first time, the Varnock paused. They hadn't expected resistance. Not like this. They hadn't expected Earth to fight. They thought they were taking a pet. But we were wolves. And the pack had just woken up. Most people on Earth had never heard of Project Midnight. Not even presidents. It was older than most governments, passed down through shadows from one war to the next. It started as a panic plan during the Cold War, if aliens ever came. Just a whisper back then, a conspiracy theory, a science fiction fantasy. But somewhere, in the cracks between paranoia and preparation, it became real. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, scattered across the Mariana Trench, the Antarctic shelf, and the ruins of long-dead naval stations, the pieces were assembled. Not by corporations, not by nations, but by those who understood that Earth might one day face a power it couldn't negotiate with, a power it couldn't bribe, a power that didn't care who had money or flags. And when that day came, Earth wouldn't argue. It would bite back. That was the Midnight Armada. They weren't just ships. They were war machines fused with the raw desperation of a species that had learned, again and again, to survive the impossible. Stealth tech mined from crashed probes in the 80s. Pulse weapons reverse-engineered from failed alien drones in remote labs. Nuclear cores wrapped in gravity-defying alloys that shouldn't even exist on the periodic table. And most terrifying of all, pilots born to lose, trained to never surrender. The first volley was only the beginning. Dozens of Varnock ships were torn apart in under an hour. They had shields, but not against weapons that broke physics, not against AI-piloted swarm jets that melted through armor like butter, not against missiles programmed to learn on impact. Earth didn't just fight back. It punched up. The Varnock tried to respond, but they were confused. They had studied our world. They knew our governments were fractured. They knew we argued more than we agreed. They'd watched our wars, our protests, our petty leadership. But they'd made one critical mistake. They thought our chaos meant weakness. Instead, it had made us unpredictable. Above Earth, space became a firestorm. Entire cities watched from rooftops and cracked TV screens as stars blinked out. Explosions that rippled across the night. Kids cried. Old veterans saluted. Prisoners and priests dropped to their knees for different reasons. And deep in orbit, Elias Corr gritted his teeth in the command deck of the Nox Revenant, flagship of the Armada. "She's holding for now," said Ava Sorrell, his weapons officer, voice sharp over the roar of sensors. "But those bastards are learning. They've already adapted to Mark V pulse cannons." Corr nodded, jaw clenched. "Switch to Project Banshee." Ava hesitated. "That's untested. They're aliens. We're human. They haven't met desperate yet." She smirked grimly. "Yes, sir." As the Varnock adapted, so did humanity. That was our thing. Our curse, our power. We break, we suffer, and then we evolve. Project Banshee wasn't a weapon. It was a frequency. A sound that didn't make sense to alien minds. A psychic scream. Developed using dark science that had been banned on Earth decades ago. It didn't kill, but it disoriented. Made them feel, for the first time, fear. 1 minute, Varnock ships moved with eerie silence and control. The next, they staggered, spinning off course, slamming into each other like blind animals. Their movements turned erratic, their coordination fractured. In that chaos, the second wave of the Midnight Armada launched. Heavier ships, slower, but carrying payloads so massive they were nicknamed planet punchers. And down on Earth, something else was happening. Hope. It spread not like fire, but like oxygen-feeding flames that had almost gone out. In a small village in Kenya, kids who had been hiding in clay huts emerged to stare at the sky, wide-eyed. In a crumbling shelter in Ukraine, a group of old women turned on a rusted radio and cheered through their tears. In the streets of Tokyo, where blackouts had silenced everything, people began banging pots and pans, shouting up at the heavens. Not in fear, in defiance. The world wasn't saved, not yet, but it was standing, and the Varnock felt it. Inside their mothership, orbiting beyond the moon, High Archon Vectal watched the feed in confusion. His species had dominated over 40 planets, broken civilizations 10 times Earth's size. "This resistance," he hissed, his many eyes twitching. It was not forecasted. "Primitive instincts," one of his lieutenants said. "Temporary. They will burn out." But even he didn't sound convinced. They had miscalculated Earth, misread our madness, misjudged the beauty of a species so fractured it had invented over 200 ways to say, "I'm sorry," but only one to say, "Try me." Still, the battle was far from over. The Varnock began deploying groundbreakers, massive machines designed to drill into Earth's crust and inject a chemical compound that would poison the planet for human life, turning it into a colony world. 3 landed in Brazil, 1 in Siberia, another near Johannesburg. The Armada couldn't stop all of them. That's when Kor made a call that even his own crew questioned. "Wake the ghosts," he ordered. Ava stared. "Sir, you mean—" "Yes, the rogue cells, the condemned units, blacklisted tech, everything we buried because it was too dangerous. I want it in the field, now." There were no debates. There was only war. Within hours, entire cities saw things they weren't supposed to see. Prototype battle mechs rolled through ruined streets, 40 feet tall and glowing with blue plasma. Cybernetic soldiers, once labeled war criminals, marched in silence toward Varnock landing sites with eyes that pulsed red. Even orbital drop pods, the kind banned by every human treaty, fell like meteors, splitting the sky with thunder as they deployed bio-enhanced commandos bred for one thing: revenge. The cost was brutal. Every victory bled. São Paulo lost 100,000 people in one night as civilians tried to escape a groundbreaker explosion. In Johannesburg, a tactical nuke stopped a Varnock drill, but wiped out 2 whole city blocks. And in the icy wilds of Siberia, human forces lost contact completely. All that remained was a single message, sent in bloodied Morse code. We held. But Earth wasn't counting losses anymore. We were counting punches landed. The Midnight Armada took damage, but never broke. Not when Kor's second-in-command was vaporized in front of him. Not when one of their own ships turned traitor after a Varnock virus infected its AI. Not even when the Nox Revenant itself was struck by a plasma beam and spun off course, trailing fire. Because behind the pain, behind the screams and smoke and falling debris, Earth had remembered who it was. A planet forged in struggle, a people built on rebellion, and we were just getting started. Back on the Revenant, Kor, wounded and barely conscious, was strapped into a neural interface now. The only way to keep the ship fighting was to become it. Every move hurt, every command risked frying his brain, but he didn't stop. Not until he heard the signal. It came through on an old emergency band. Analog, not digital, a frequency no Varnock tech could block. It was a whisper. One word. Unity. And suddenly, all across Earth, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in human history, every military, every faction, every militia, every resistance group synced. China shared satellite intel with NATO. Russia dropped supplies to American troops. African coalitions opened their airspace to European drones. Rogue hacker groups gave access to Varnock code they'd stolen days ago. The world had stopped being separate nations. Now, we were one species, and the message we sent was simple. You wanted a war? You got one. The Midnight Armada began to swell, now joined by refitted civilian freighters, retrofitted space shuttles, and even private space ventures that turned cargo rockets into weapon platforms. Humans with no training launched themselves into orbit, dragging scrap cannons and magnetic harpoons, laughing like lunatics, ready to die just to make the enemy bleed. And they did. The Varnock lost their second command ship near Mars when a rogue colony of miners slingshotted a 50-ton asteroid straight into its path. Another was shredded by kamikaze pilots from Earth's last surviving air forces, flying at speeds that melted their own wings. Each death felt like thunder. Each sacrifice lit up the dark. And then, we saw it. The Varnock weren't invincible. They bled. And humanity? We don't stop when we're bleeding. We start to roar. Victory, as it turned out, wasn't clean. It never is. By the time the second Varnock command ship fell, Earth had already lost over 60 million lives. Entire cities were unrecognizable. Satellite coverage was a patchwork of static and blackouts. Oceans boiled in places where crash debris had punctured the seafloor. Even the moon had craters glowing red with the wreckage of ships that tried, and failed, to orbit it. But we were still standing. And standing, for humanity, was halfway to winning. Commander Elias Kor hadn't slept in 4 days. He couldn't. The neural link with the Nox Revenant was burning through his nervous system. Every command he gave with his mind sent pain shooting down his spine. His fingers no longer worked. His heart skipped beats. But he stayed in the chair, because the moment he stopped, Earth would follow. "Status," he grunted, jaw clenched so tightly it cracked one of his molars. Ava Sorrell's voice was thin through the static. 5 more Varnock skimmers down. We've lost 2 more capital ships. The Mercy Cutter was vaporized above the Mediterranean. No survivors. Civilians are arming themselves. Global comms remain at 48% capacity. Kor exhaled. And the third Varnock command ship? Still hiding behind the moon, Ava replied. We've detected movement. They're preparing something big. Kor already knew what that meant. The Purge Protocol. It was only theory, whispered about in debriefings from other alien-conquered worlds. A weapon so catastrophic, the Varnock rarely used it. Not because of morality, they had none, but because it left the planet useless afterward. They called it ash rain. Microscopic machines rained down from orbit, self-replicating, indestructible. They didn't just kill, they erased biology itself. Cells unraveled, ecosystems collapsed. The planet died quietly. No fire, no screams, just silence. It was the Varnock's last card, and they were about to play it. Back on Earth, amidst the chaos, a signal was rising, not from orbit, not from a ship, from below. Deep in the ruins of Detroit, in a bunker sealed since the 2040s, a woman named Dr. Kira Lanik activated a system no one else dared to touch. Project Thornlight. It was never meant to be used. Built in secret after the second lunar crisis, Thornlight was a last-chance failsafe, a planetary cannon that drew energy from Earth's molten core. It took a full month to charge. It hadn't even been tested. Kira knew that. But she also knew something else. There was no month. There were hours, and maybe, just maybe. If Thornlight worked, it could punch a hole through the Varnock's main warship before the ash rain began. Power at 34%, said the AI, voice shaking through old speakers. Core temperature rising beyond safe levels. Reactor instability. Critical. Kira ignored the warnings. She bled from one eye, but she kept typing. Her bones ached. Her breath was shallow. But she had made this machine. This monster. Now she had to aim it. Above Earth, the Midnight Armada prepared for one final charge. Humanity had thrown everything at the Varnock. Missiles, EMPs, plasma mines, ion storms, hell, even a hacked weather satellite that triggered a super typhoon over the Atlantic to fry ground troops. But this would be the kill shot. Commander Kor's voice was faint but steady across all Allied channels. To every last fighter still breathing, we hit them now. Don't wait for orders. Don't wait for backup. If you can fly, fly. If you can shoot, shoot. You want to save Earth? He paused. Then bleed for it. And they did. Thousands of ships, patched together with duct tape and fury, soared into space. Cargo haulers rigged with cannons, mining vessels refitted with ramming spikes, even passenger jets, stripped to their bones, launched into low orbit carrying pilots with more guts than training. It wasn't an assault. It was a suicide pact with glory. And somewhere in that madness, the Varnock hesitated again. Not because of tactics, because they didn't understand. This wasn't logic. This wasn't war the way they knew it. This was rage. This was a species that had been enslaved, poisoned, betrayed, divided, and had still come back together to spit in the face of annihilation. The Varnock couldn't compute that. And that pause, that 1-second hesitation, was all Earth needed. At exactly 02:47 UTC, Project Thornlight fired. The ground split open beneath Detroit. The sky glowed red like the devil himself had blinked. A beam of pure energy shot into space, leaving behind a crater the size of a city. It struck the Varnock mothership square in the core. The ship didn't just explode, it screamed. Across every channel, the Varnock's communications burst into static. Some said they heard voices, others heard crying, others just went silent, staring at the stars. And then the sky began to fall. Chunks of the mothership, burning with unnatural green fire, rained down over the Pacific. The ash rain was never deployed. The drones dropped lifeless from orbit. The remaining Varnock ships scattered, fleeing. Commander Kor slumped in his chair, unconscious, his mind overloaded. Blood dripped from his nose. His vitals were flatlining. But Earth had won. The war wasn't over. But the invasion was. 3 days later, silence. No more attacks, no more Varnock transmissions. The sky, once covered in smoke and flame, showed stars again, and sunlight. Real golden sunlight. For the first time in weeks, people crawled from bunkers and shelters and ruins and just looked up. They didn't cheer. Not at first. They listened. To the wind, to birds, to each other. In the rubble of what was once Times Square, a little boy found a flower growing between 2 cracks of concrete. He didn't understand the science. He didn't know what the Armada was. But he smiled. And that was enough. Commander Elias Kor survived, but barely. His spine was fused with metal. His left eye was gone. He couldn't walk anymore. His brain had to be stabilized with a neural lattice made from salvaged Varnock tech. But when he woke up, still strapped to the captain's chair aboard the Revenant, he only asked one question. "Did we burn them?" Ava Sorrell nodded, her voice cracking. "We did." He grinned, teeth broken, face half paralyzed, but the smile was real. Then the story's not over. Rebuilding Earth was a nightmare. Supply lines were shattered. Nations were in shambles. Half the internet was gone, and trust, after decades of division, was thin. But people tried. Former enemies shared water. Old rivals co-wrote emergency laws. Flags were lowered, not in defeat, but in solidarity. For once, Earth wasn't ruled by politics. It was ruled by survivors. And while most of the Varnock retreated into deep space, a few remained behind. Wrecked, wounded, stranded. We didn't kill them. We quarantined them. Let them see what it meant to be human. Let them learn what vengeance looked like after the war. Because we weren't just rebuilding, we were preparing for the next time, for the sequel. In a hidden station on Mars, engineers began working on the next generation warship, codenamed Solar Fang. On the Moon, soldiers trained in new zero-G environments, their uniforms stitched with the symbol of a burning planet wrapped in chains and breaking them. And back on Earth, in a quiet hospital far from the noise, Commander Kor stared out a window, his body broken but his eyes alive. A nurse entered. She offered a weak smile. "They're calling it the War of Flame and Silence. Memorials are being built. Kids are learning your name." He didn't look away from the sky. "They'll need to forget it soon," he said. Why? She asked. Kor blinked. Because remembering it means peace. He looked back at her, eyes cold and clear. And peace never lasts. Thus ended the first chapter of humanity's greatest defiance. They came to make Earth bow. We made them burn. The world didn't heal. Not really. Victory had come like a thunderclap. Loud, violent, and final. But what it left behind was silence. And scars. The sky was clear again, yes. The ash had stopped falling. The wreckage of the Varnock fleet slowly drifted into Earth's atmosphere, or was pulled into distant gravity wells, burning out like cursed stars. The sun returned to its rightful throne, lighting the broken bones of Earth. But the ground was different now. Cities were still rubble. Governments were mostly shadows. Communication was half static, half prayer. The Midnight Armada, Earth's saviors, had been torn apart by their own sacrifice. Barely 1/3 of the original ships remained, and most of them were limping through orbit on backup systems and jury-rigged hope. Commander Elias Kor was no longer in charge. He was recovering, if one could call it that, locked in a medical isolation chamber beneath what used to be Geneva. His brain had fused with the ship interface. Too much exposure. Too many neural burns. He spoke in short, cryptic sentences now, often confusing dreams with memory. But he was still feared, still respected, still watched, because something in him had changed. Something cold, something aware. And people whispered. Maybe he saw something. Maybe when he was inside the network fighting for the world, he saw more than enemy formations and tactics. Maybe he saw them. 6 months passed. Earth tried to rebuild. In Europe, food was rationed by drones salvaged from ruined tech firms. In North America, warlords who had risen during the invasion were slowly being hunted down by joint peacekeeping units. Asia rebuilt faster, their underground bunkers and logistics systems surviving the worst of the orbital strikes. Africa, which had suffered early landings from the Varnock, now became a rallying point. Its people had fought hardest, and they began leading the cleanup with brutal efficiency. But something was wrong. People were going missing. Not many, just a few at first. Scientists, pilots, people who had worked on Project Thornlight. Survivors of direct contact with Varnock tech. In the beginning it was chalked up to post-war trauma, disappearances, suicides. Maybe someone finally cracked under pressure. Then the footage came in. A security drone, stationed at the edge of the Siberian quarantine zone, caught the whole thing. A man walking out of the snow, naked, shivering, eyes glowing faintly blue. He wasn't Varnock. He was human. Dr. Adrian Vesk, biotech engineer, pronounced dead 5 months earlier, buried beneath a Varnock drill site. Yet there he was, alive, and not alone. Behind him came more figures, men and women, some children, survivors, people presumed killed, all walking like they'd been reborn. Blank stares, silent mouths, no emotion, no memory. Just one word they all repeated. Signal. Ava Sorel had taken command of what remained of the Nox Revenant. It no longer flew. It hung in Earth's upper orbit like a broken fang. But it was still armed, still dangerous. And Ava? She was no longer just a weapons officer. She was the last war captain Earth trusted. When she saw the footage, she didn't wait. She called a meeting of the remaining Midnight Armada Council. 13 people. That's all Earth had left at the top. Pilots, engineers, tacticians, former rebels. One ex-criminal who had commandeered a mining rig and used it to take down 2 Varnock war cruisers by himself. They sat in a ruined orbital station orbiting the South Pole, oxygen masks hanging from the ceiling, backup lights flickering. "What do we know?" Ava asked. One of the analysts leaned forward. "The ones returning. They've been altered. Not physically, genetically. Brain scans show new neural pathways. Something grew inside their minds, patterns we don't recognize. Varnock tech? Someone asked. No, the analyst replied. Something older. Silence followed. Then the criminal spoke. Flint, grizzled, missing 3 fingers, voice like gravel. I saw one. Thought it was a ghost. My brother died in the São Paulo strike. Saw him 2 nights ago, just standing on a ridge, staring at the sky. No one laughed. No one doubted. The Varnock had been defeated. But they hadn't come alone, and they hadn't come first. Commander Kor awoke that same night. He screamed a name no one understood. Sareth Nol. And then he began to write, not with words, with symbols, dozens of them, scratched into the walls of his chamber with his own nails. Spirals, eyes, stars within stars, languages that didn't exist in any known human lexicon. But the AI that monitored his vitals caught something strange. Some of those symbols matched patterns embedded deep in Varnock data cores. Patterns they didn't understand either, which meant only one thing. The Varnock were running. They hadn't come to conquer. They'd come to hide. Ava flew down to the ruins of Detroit 2 days later. Project Thornlight had been shut down, sealed under 50 meters of steel. The energy it had drawn from Earth's core had caused minor quakes across the continent. The scientists who had worked on it were mostly dead. Except one, Dr. Kira Lanik. She was still alive, but changed. She lived in the shell of a war hospital, surrounded by broken screens and disconnected wires. Her hair had turned white. Her eyes barely blinked. But when Ava entered, Kira looked up. "You saw them too," she whispered. Ava sat. "Who?" Kira smiled without warmth. "The ones behind the Varnock. The ones in the signal. They weren't coming for Earth. They were fleeing. They came to use us as a wall. A last stand." Ava leaned forward. "Who were they running from?" Kira didn't speak at first, just reached into a rusted drawer and pulled out a small device, half-burnt, buzzing faintly. "Varnock black box," she said. "Recovered from the debris over the Pacific. Decoded it myself." She placed it on the table and pressed play, at first only static. Then a voice, crackling, alien, desperate. Varnock language translated into a rough approximation. "The darkness has reached the outer swarm. The harbinger awakens. Earth must fall first. Earth is the last spark. It must go dark, or they will see." The harbinger. No one knew what it meant. But Ava suddenly understood the Varnock's silence, their violence, their cruelty. They weren't conquerors. They were covering a light. Ours. In the shadows of the cratered moon, something began to stir. An object buried for thousands of years beneath the dust. Older than any Varnock ship, older than humanity. A monolith pulsing faintly, reactivated by the neural screams of the battle, awakened by the Thornlight blast. It sent out a single pulse, across space, across time, and something heard it. On Earth, the signs came fast. Children born after the war began drawing spirals in their sleep. Entire flocks of birds began flying in circles over cities that had been Varnock targets. The oceans began to hum at night, frequencies so low they made tectonic plates vibrate. People called it aftershock. But the Midnight Armada knew better. This was Stage 2. Ava stood on the shattered bridge of the Nox Revenant, watching Earth below, surrounded by screens flashing red. Reports of missing bodies, glowing lakes, entire forests blooming overnight with plants no one recognized. She opened a channel to the surviving captains. "All of you know what this means." No one replied. She continued. "The Varnock weren't our apocalypse. They were the fuse. Something's coming, something worse, and it sees us now, knows we survived." A long pause. Then Flint's voice broke through, ragged but firm. "So what do we do, Captain?" Ava's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "We light the skies again." She stepped forward and gave the command. "Rebuild the Armada." The Midnight Armada was never meant to fly again. After the Varnock invasion, most of its ships had been gutted. Some burned in orbit, others used as scrap to rebuild city grids. Humanity had thrown everything into that first battle, like a gambler betting on one last desperate hand. But Captain Ava Sorrell gave the order anyway. "Rebuild the Armada." Not because Earth was ready, it wasn't, but because the signs were multiplying. Too many omens, too many strange phenomena they couldn't explain. The Harbinger, whatever it was coming. And Earth couldn't afford to be caught unarmed again. The first thing they needed was ships. That meant pulling wrecks out of oceans, hauling scorched hulls from deserts, refitting museum pieces from the old space age. Engineers worked by candlelight and solar generators, patching old ships with nanotech and Varnock scraps. Civilians volunteered by the thousands. Some wanted revenge. Others wanted purpose. Most just wanted to know there was still something worth fighting for. By month 3, they had 50 working warships. By month 6, they had a new fleet, and they called it the Ashlight Armada. Not just a resurrection, an evolution. Meanwhile, the moon was no longer quiet. In a crater near the Mare Tranquillitatis, the monolith pulsed again, faster this time. The patterns it emitted were picked up by every deep space array, every radio tower, every neural implant linked to the old Armada. The symbols repeated: seedling, awakening, origin, spark. For weeks, scientists argued over the meaning. Some said it was alien poetry. Others thought it was a countdown. But one group, buried deep inside the restructured UN Research Command, found something chilling. Those symbols matched carvings found in prehistoric ruins on Earth, caves in Namibia, temples in Peru. Even fossil records hinted at shapes that didn't belong. Humanity hadn't just imagined spirals and stars, it had remembered them. As if we'd seen them before. As if something inside us had always known this was coming. Commander Elias Corr had stopped speaking. After months of silence and wild symbols, he went quiet one morning, heart rate steady, brain still active, but voice gone. Doctors ran tests. Psychiatrists theorized he had locked himself into a defensive mental loop. But they were wrong. Corr wasn't sleeping. He was listening. In his mind, deep inside the fractured remnants of his neural link, he saw the same image every night. A dying star. A great structure built around it like a cage, and within it, something vast. Something impossible. It didn't speak with words. It didn't threaten. It simply waited. The Harbinger. It wasn't a being. It was a force, older than time, older than stars. Not life, not death, just correction. Galaxies expanded. Civilizations rose. Life bloomed. The Harbinger came to reset it all. Earth had been a spark, a flare of rebellion so bright that it pierced the silence between systems. When humanity fought back against the Varnock, when it screamed its defiance into the stars, it was heard. And now the Harbinger knew where the noise came from. In a remote Arctic observatory, a group of young astronomers picked up a dark signature. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a signal. It was an absence. A place where light stopped. A cold void slowly approaching the edge of the solar system. Invisible to most tech. Undetectable by standard means. But the Ashlight Armada saw it, and it was massive, thousands of kilometers wide, shaped like a black flower, each petal unfolding slowly, rhythmically. They called it the Bloom, and it was headed straight for Earth. Flint, now a captain in the reformed Armada, stood with Ava in the war room above the stratosphere, looking down at Earth. He lit a cigarette, hands scarred and calloused. "You still think we can win?" Ava didn't answer immediately. "Didn't think we could last time," she said finally. Flint chuckled. "Fair." They looked over the latest telemetry. The bloom was 30 days out, maybe less. Its gravity well was already tugging on distant asteroids. Satellites had started drifting out of orbit. Migratory birds were flying in circles. Whales beached themselves in places they shouldn't have been. Earth was sensing it, like an animal before a storm. In Brazil, a teenager named Mei Li began having dreams. She wasn't anyone special. 16. Lived in a refugee tent city built after the orbital fires. Lost her mother in the São Paulo quake. Father was missing. But Mei Li dreamed in colors that didn't exist, and she spoke words in her sleep that no human had ever taught her. Scientists found her after she started carving symbols into the dirt that matched the monolith's patterns. She didn't remember doing it, didn't even know how she knew the language, but when they showed her a satellite image of the bloom, she didn't scream. She whispered, "It's not the end. It's the answer." Ava flew to see her. She sat in a small tent with Mei Li, surrounded by nervous researchers and armed guards. No one knew what to expect. "Why are you drawing those shapes?" Ava asked gently. Mei Li looked down. Her fingers were smudged with charcoal. "They told me to." "Who?" Mei Li's eyes were distant, far older than a teenager's. "The ones that left." "Left what?" Mei Li stared up at the sky. "This place, this experiment." Ava frowned. "You think Earth was an experiment?" "I don't think," Mei Li said softly. "I remember." She wasn't the only one. Across the globe, hundreds, then thousands, began experiencing awakening events. People who had never met spoke the same phrases, drew the same symbols, saw the same visions. A seed inside humanity was sprouting, something planted long ago, and the harbinger was coming to burn it before it bloomed. Inside the monolith on the moon, an ancient AI began to stir. Its voice was damaged, fragmented. But it reached out to Earth's systems in pulses, activating relics buried deep beneath the crust. Satellite arrays turned toward deep space. Abandoned research labs powered up. Even sunken data centers beneath the Indian Ocean blinked to life. One phrase repeated, "Origin code accepted. Last flame detected. Prepare the archive." It wasn't a defense system. It was a message in a bottle, and Earth was the bottle. The Ashlight Armada prepared for launch. 30 days, that's all they had. 30 days to turn scrap into steel, chaos into strategy. Humanity's last war wasn't about territory or survival. It was about truth. The Varnock were gone. But in their wake, they had left behind a signal, a flare that revealed Earth's true nature, a forgotten outpost, a failed seedbed, or perhaps a spark that wasn't meant to exist, but did anyway. Ava stood before her captains. Her eyes were red, her voice calm. "This enemy isn't here for conquest. They're here to erase us, to silence the scream we made when we told the stars we'd rather burn than kneel. And we'll give them an answer." She looked each one of them in the eye. "Let's make the sky loud again." The bloom reached the edge of the solar system on a cold, silent Tuesday. It didn't announce itself. It didn't send messages. It just moved, impossibly slow, like a black flower unfolding across space, each petal thousands of kilometers long. Instruments went haywire. Gravitational readings spiked. Electromagnetic pulses flickered across the void like ghost lightning. But the worst part? It made no sound, not even static, just silence. And that silence spread. Satellites shut down mid-signal. Ships lost contact with command. Even the monolith on the moon, which had been pulsing for weeks, went dark. Ava Sorrell stood on the observation deck of the AHS Revenant II, the Ashlight Armada's flagship, staring at the growing void in the distance. The bloom wasn't a ship. It was a wound in the fabric of reality, and something was coming out of it. The first scouts appeared on day 3. No ships, no thrusters, just forms, shimmering outlines in the shape of beasts, bending light as they moved through space like smoke through water. The Armada's early warning systems pinged, confused. "They're not solid," whispered Ava's navigator. "I don't think they're real, not in the way we understand." But they were deadly. The first contact was in Neptune's orbit, the AHS Calderon, a repurposed mining vessel outfitted with plasma lances, opened fire on the incoming shimmer forms. Lasers passed straight through them. One shimmer phased into the hull without piercing the metal. 10 seconds later, the crew was gone. No blood, no bodies, just empty suits floating in vacuum. Something inside the shimmer had reached in and erased them. No screams, no alerts, just deletion. The Harbinger didn't want to kill. It wanted to unmake. Earth's defense grid kicked in. Nuclear platforms long buried under the Arctic Circle came online. The Ashlight Armada formed its defensive perimeter between Mars and the asteroid belt, trying to force the enemy into a bottleneck. Ava knew it wouldn't hold. She wasn't trying to stop the Harbinger. She was trying to buy time, because down on Earth, something deeper was happening. In an ancient jungle in northern Peru, explorers stumbled into a cave untouched for thousands of years. On the walls, spiral symbols, constellations that didn't match Earth's sky, and a mural carved in blood-red stone of a black flower swallowing a sun. At the center, a childlike figure holding a flame. Behind it, a creature with many eyes, retreating into shadow. The message was clear, if you knew how to see it. The Harbinger had been here before. And we'd beaten it. Somehow. In Geneva, inside a bunker beneath what used to be the World Science Assembly, a team of hybrid researchers worked to decrypt the moon monolith's final data burst. What they found rewrote everything. Earth hadn't been seeded by accident. Humanity was an archive, a last-ditch fail-safe from a lost civilization older than the Varnock, older than the stars themselves, a species wiped out by the Harbinger in another age. They had encoded fragments of themselves into DNA, hidden blueprints in our minds, left breadcrumbs in our myths. Humans weren't just life. We were memory, carriers of something precious, something the Harbinger couldn't erase, not unless it destroyed every last one of us. And now that it knew we were still here, it was coming to finish the job. Ava stood in the war room of the Revenant II, surrounded by tactical maps flickering red. "Everything we are," she said to the gathered commanders, "every war we've fought, every loss, every miracle, it wasn't just survival, it was resistance, built into our bones, passed down like a virus." She looked around the room. Flint. Captain Song. Rhea Tulane, the pilot who took down a Varnock dreadnought with her own escape pod. "This isn't about saving Earth anymore. This is about keeping the fire alive." She tapped the screen. "We're not the final battle. We're the warning flare." The Harbinger's first true assault came on day 7. A shimmer storm descended on Mars' orbit, shredding drones and satellites with tendrils of dark energy. The Ashlight Armada scrambled, 50 ships engaging in what would later be known as the orbit burn, a desperate maneuver to slam into the approaching shimmer forms before they reached Earth's defense grid. Ava watched from the bridge as 12 ships sacrificed themselves in the opening minutes. Explosions filled the void. Some shimmer forms broke apart. Most just kept coming. And then, the Thorn Protocol activated. Earth's last hope wasn't in ships or guns. It was in melee, The girl from Brazil. She was no longer dreaming. She was channeling. Through her voice, the monolith spoke. She sat in a chamber in Greenland, wrapped in biosync cables, her eyes white with neural light. "The Harbinger is not a thing," she whispered. "It is a reaction. Life grows too fast. It reaches too far. The universe resets the board." A scientist leaned in. "Can it be stopped?" "No," Mei said. "But it can be slowed." Project Thornlight 2 was brought online. Not a weapon, a signal. Built in the ruins of the old cannon, powered by Earth's core and Varnock fusion cores, it would send a psychic pulse across space, the same frequency that activated the moon's monolith. A call, a reminder that we were still here, that the fire hadn't gone out. But firing it would destroy everything within 500 kilometers. Someone had to stay behind to align the core. Flint volunteered. "Old men," he said with a grin, "should go out loud." Ava hugged him, not as a commander, but as a friend. "I'll see you on the other side." "Just don't name a school after me," he muttered. "That's the worst kind of memorial." He disappeared into the depths of the Thornlight complex with a detonator in one hand and a cigarette in the other. On day 10, the signal fired. The earth cracked. The clouds screamed. And in space, for the first time, the Harbinger's forces hesitated. Not because they were afraid, but because they recognized the pattern. They had seen it before. The same signature from the first civilization they failed to erase completely. That failure was us. The bloom began to close. Not retreating, reconfiguring. The second phase was beginning. Ava looked out from the bridge of the Revenant 2 as light bent unnaturally across space. "This isn't over," she whispered. Behind her, the crew stood in silence. "We bought time," said Captain Song. "But what now?" Ava turned, face lit by the dying pulse of Thornlight. "Now? We take the fight to them." The moment the bloom reconfigured, the stars behind it blinked out. Not from dust, not from distance, from something else. Mass. What came out of the bloom wasn't a fleet. It wasn't an army. It was a continent, folded and sent across the void like a mountain hurled between galaxies. A structure so massive it distorted time around it. A living megastructure, black as grief, shaped like a hollowed-out starfish, drifting into our system one limb at a time. The Harbinger had sent its route, and Earth only had 5 days before it touched orbit. Ava Sorrell stood on the hangar deck of the Revenant 2, watching crews weld armor plates onto shuttle wings, load missiles into rotating racks, paint death oaths and prayers on their hulls. Mechanics moved like ghosts, silent, exhausted, precise. Everything was ready. Except her. She wasn't sure if she was a commander anymore. She felt more like a candle, burning fast, hoping to light something bigger before she went out. Her body ached. Her mind felt detached. The neural implants they'd grafted into her spine after the Varnock War were flaring, constant pain. But she didn't tell anyone. Not yet. "Captain?" Rhea Tulane approached, helmet tucked under one arm, a scar newly healed across her cheek. "You need to see this." In the strategy chamber, a projection hovered over the table, mapped from deep space scans and telemetry pulled from the Thornlight signal. The route wasn't just drifting. It was anchoring itself to invisible coordinates, locked into the subspace echoes of the monoliths. "This is deliberate," Rhea said. "It's not just coming to kill us." Ava narrowed her eyes. "It's coming to harvest." The data didn't lie. The route wasn't a weapon. It was a collector, and Earth was the last archive. Back on the planet, Mei was deteriorating. She hadn't spoken in hours. Her brain was overheating, literal static flaring across her synapses. Med teams couldn't sedate her. They couldn't even get close. She floated 2 feet off her hospital bed, humming a tone that matched the bloom's frequency. They tried cutting the neural lines. She screamed, not in pain, in loss. "Don't let it take us," she whispered, eyes wide and glowing white. "They want the memory. They want to finish the forgetting." The last words she spoke before going comatose were carved into the metal wall by her voice alone. "Light must cross the veil." That was when Ava made the call. The Revenant 2 wouldn't defend Earth. It would lead an invasion, straight into the bloom, not to destroy it, to find its mind and kill it. 2 days before the route reached Earth's moon, the Ashlight Armada began its departure burn. Engines ignited like new suns. The fleet looked nothing like the original Midnight Armada. It was meaner, leaner, made of scrap and desperation, stitched with alien alloys and human fury. 89 ships, each armed with experimental weapons, EMP warheads, neutron destabilizers, pulse bombs harvested from Varnock cores. But the deadliest thing they carried wasn't tech. It was memory, rage, loss, defiance, and hope. The closer they got to the bloom, the less real space felt. Distances stretched, light bent, colors shifted, instruments failed. Some pilots hallucinated voices in their cockpits. Others reported seeing versions of themselves, older, younger, dead. One pilot, a girl barely 20, looked into the void and saw her mother, long dead, whispering, "Come home." She opened the cockpit and flew into the dark. No one recovered her. Inside the bloom, things stopped making sense. Physics broke. The laws that had guided humanity since fire and stone, gravity, inertia, entropy, twisted. One ship entered a corridor that looped back on itself infinitely. Another fired a missile that reappeared behind them, but Ava kept going, deep into the center. Toward the pulse, the mind route. It wasn't a brain, not in the way humans understood. It was a consciousness, a presence, vast, cold, detached. It didn't hate humanity. It didn't even know hate. It saw life the way a forest sees fire, necessary, cleansing, inevitable. But it recognized the fire humanity carried, the defiant kind, the kind that builds and breaks and builds again. It feared that kind, because once, long ago, it had failed to destroy it. And now that fire was back. The Ashlight Armada reached the core. Dozens of ships already lost. One cruiser, the Orpheus, had turned inward, its own crew now part of the route's structure, merged into walls of flesh and crystal, still screaming silently from within. But Ava didn't flinch. "This is where we hold," she said. "This is where we tell the universe, not again." They deployed the Eidolon bomb, a psychic weapon designed to fracture collective minds. Risky. It could collapse every human brain in range, but it could also stun the root. Long enough. The countdown began. Rhea took position on the secondary ship, the Maelstrom ready to trigger the Eidolon if Ava's ship got taken. Flint's voice came through the comms, broadcast from a recorded message stored in the Revenant's core. "If you're hearing this, I'm already dust. But hey, maybe that's the price for memory. To be remembered, something's gotta be sacrificed. So if you've still got fire in you, burn brighter." The fleet opened fire. The bloom responded. Shimmer forms poured out like smoke given form. They weren't real, but they killed. Pilots went blind in seconds. Ships froze mid-burn. AI systems corrupted instantly. Ava's own ship lost half its functions in the first volley, but then something snapped. Meili's voice, from Earth, across the void, through every ship. "Don't let them erase us." A final surge of power lit the core of the Revenant 2, and Ava made her final call. "Now!" The Eidolon bomb exploded, not in light, in memory, a psychic scream, billions of lives, all of Earth's suffering, love, war, laughter, rage. The weight of being human poured into one pulse. It struck the mind root, and it shattered, not physically, emotionally. For a split second, the Harbinger knew what we were, and it hesitated. And that moment was all we needed. Ava's ship collided with the mind root, not with weapons, with herself. The explosion consumed the core. The fire spread backward through the bloom, lighting every corridor, every limb, every cursed petal. A new star was born in the dark, and the Harbinger screamed for the first time in eternity. The Ashlight Armada fled. Only 19 ships made it out. Rhea Tulane piloted the last cruiser back into real space, her hands shaking, face soaked in tears. Behind them, the bloom collapsed in on itself. Not gone, but wounded. Retreating. For now. Back on Earth, Millie woke up. She smiled. She did it, and then she passed away. The skies above Earth cleared. Stars returned. The dead were counted. The names etched into orbital rings and space-borne cathedrals, and far above, drifting quietly in orbit, the monolith pulsed again. Just once. One word. In light. Remember. The war ended in silence. No trumpets, no victory parades, no surrender from the enemy, because the enemy was never truly here. It came like a wave. It receded like one, too. Slow, distant, unbothered. What the Ashlight Armada destroyed was a limb, not a body, a thought, not a god. The bloom collapsed inward, folding like a dying flower, vanishing into itself with a scream that wasn't heard by ears, but by instinct. The mind root had been scarred. Ava Sorrell had carved something into it, not a wound, but a memory. And for the first time in uncountable millennia, the Harbinger remembered fear. It wasn't gone, but it left, and Earth remained. The stars looked the same. That was the strangest part. After all the death, all the screaming and fire and shattered sky, after half the planet was reshaped by orbit burns and bloom storms, you could still look up at night and see familiar constellations. Like nothing happened. But everything had. They held the memorial in low orbit, not in a building, not on land, but aboard a drifting ring constructed from the remains of the Revenant II. No speeches, just names, 38,132 etched into the hull, each glowing when the sun passed over it. At the center, one word, in simple Terran script, Lightborn, the ones who carried the fire. Ava's name was there too. No body, no trace, just a black box with a final command locked in its encrypted core. No one knew what it said. No one wanted to open it. They figured if she came back, she'd tell them herself. Rhea Tulane was promoted to Fleet General. Not because she asked, but because there was no one else left who understood how to command warships across collapsed realities and make it home in one piece. She refused a uniform, kept wearing her pilot jacket, torn at the collar and still stained from bloom blood. She stayed in orbit, didn't return to Earth for months. When she did, it was just for one day. She went to Brazil, to Melie's grave. It was simple. A circle of rocks, untouched by tech, marked by carvings the girl had drawn during her awakenings. Spiral within spiral. At the center, a small plaque. The flame was always meant to be passed. Rhea stood there for hours. Didn't cry, didn't speak, then left. Back in Geneva, the New World Council wasn't made up of politicians. It was made up of witnesses, soldiers, scientists, pilots, survivors from cities that no longer existed, former prisoners, former rebels, a child from Ghana who watched her parents die under the Varnock and still survived. No speeches, no votes, just plans, because Earth would not wait again. It would not be caught sleeping. The monolith on the moon remained active. No longer pulsing warnings, just watching. Some believed it was waiting for the Harbinger to return. Others believed it was waiting for us, to become what we were meant to become. A civilization not defined by how far it reached, but by what it refused to forget. That was the thing. Memory. That's what made humanity dangerous. Not strength, not speed, not even intelligence, but remembrance. The ability to carry pain across generations, to hold stories, to pass grief like torches, to bury our dead not in silence, but in fire. 10 years after the bloom collapsed, Earth launched its first interstellar arc. Not for colonization, for preservation. It was called the Torch Seed, manned by volunteers, carrying DNA samples, memory archives, recorded dreams, and the writings of every major human religion, science, and art. Not to escape Earth, to echo it, in case the Harbinger returned, in case Earth didn't survive next time. A way to scream again, even from extinction. Inside the Ark's AI core was a recording of Ava Sorrell's voice. Recovered from the encrypted black box, it played only once, when the ship passed Neptune's orbit. Her voice, tired but calm, filled the bridge. If you're hearing this, then you're far from home. And if you're far from home, it means home still matters. There's a war out there, bigger than anyone understands. A war not of territory or belief, but of existence. A war between forgetting and remembering. She paused. Let them fear what we carry. Let them choke on our noise. Let them dread what comes when Earth burns. I was born in silence. I died in fire. And I'd do it all again. After that, the Torch Seed said nothing else. It kept going. Into the stars. Back on Earth, things didn't go back to normal. They never could. There was no before anymore. But there was a forward. Nations rebuilt, not as borders, but as districts of a shared species. The Ashlight Armada became a symbol, not of war, but of refusal. Statues weren't built of heroes. They were built of families. Whole communities lost to orbit burns, shimmer incursions, or self-sacrifice. Stone memorials in every country, every language, all with the same inscription carved beneath. We are the voice that will not fade. Some things changed more deeply. People started seeing differently, caring differently. The petty arguments, the old greed games, the hunger for power, all of it felt small, not gone, but exposed. And for once, those in power were afraid of the people, not because they were violent, but because they were awake, truly awake. Once you've seen the sky burn, it's hard to care about imaginary lines. And still, Earth watched the stars, waited, not in fear, in readiness, because the Harbinger would come again. Maybe not in 10 years, maybe not in 100, but one day, it would reach for the spark again. And when it did, we'd burn brighter. Because the truth wasn't just in our weapons, our tech, or even our stories, it was in our bones. We are the echo of civilizations that refused to die quietly. We are the noise in the dark. We are the light-born. So when they come again, when they command Earth to bow, we will rise, we will roar. And we will remind them what it means to fight something that refuses to be erased. Not because it is perfect, but because it remembers.